And hello, everybody. Welcome back to another very interesting interview with Amara Strand. And she was kind enough to come back and have a discussion on some topics that I think are going to be very valuable to everyone who's listening to the videos today. So, Amara, welcome back.
Thanks, Howdy. I'm really happy to be here.
How is life in the western part of the US for you now?
Uh, I don't know how to answer that, but um, I have found so many opportunities to explore new avenues because everything right now is changing. Everything is up for grabs, right? And I found that I could be anxious about that and grim about it, or I could look for the space in between the cracks and see all of the new things that are coming. So that's just how I choose to do life in the Western world.
Hey, I'm saying that just because I'm back in the snow blizzard here. So my mind is drifting to where you are of like just wanting to be in that space. So, um, okay. Well, the topic we think we'd like to talk to you about is something that Amara labels energetic hygiene. And it's an extremely important thing. It's this idea of just like we care and wash for our physical body, we need to, in a sense, care and wash for our energetic body.
Exactly. And this is really like it's one of the most fundamental practices that I have developed. And it's something that I use every day, all day long. So, you know how when we talk about meditation practices or, some of the more esoteric things, um, there are things that we sit down to do once in a while, whereas this is something that I feel changes your entire experience of life once you embrace it. So it's very fundamental. It's not difficult, and but it's something that we have to like wrap our minds around and really practice on a daily basis.
Now, if I remember correctly, like you started doing this sort of on your own when you were very young, right? You began this at a very young age.
I did, and the reason was because I kind of had to. Like sometimes these things are not just an inquiry of interest, but you find yourself in situations where it's a pressing need. And so when I was a child, as you well know, I was born sort of like ultra sensory. So I perceive and experience things that maybe other people don't. And these things, when I was a child, they were very, some were wonderful and some were not, and they were very extreme. So one of the things that I experienced was the thoughts of other people and sort of the energetic bodies of other people, what other people think of as being private, for instance. I would experience these things. And so that's very difficult for a young person to process, always being in this kind of soup with other people's thoughts and feelings that they think are private, right? So maybe these are not things that they would necessarily share or say to a small child, and yet I experienced them anyway. And so, as a small child, I kind of started trying to protect myself from these things, and then slowly this developed and refined as I got older and as I experienced more things and as I began to understand my own energetic nature in more of an adult way.
So would you classify, because I mean, this is just one thing, right? These idea of thoughts from other people. Would you classify, let's say the hygiene that you're doing are just things that you've picked, things that we pick up from some external source that are not necessarily ours, and we don't need to have in our energy field. Is that a good um,
That's a great
definition? Or?
place. That's a great place to start. And so let's talk about what is our inner environment. Um, you know, you would think that when I say that, everyone would say, oh yeah, we all have one concept of what that is, but let's talk about that to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when you, Howdy, have your inner experience, that inner environment, what's in there? What kinds of things do you experience in there? What would you say constitutes your inner environment?
It's such a challenge because normally my answer would be it's something that happens inside the physical body, that the body becomes a barrier between outside and inside, right? So normally
Right.
you would say, so the normal answer, or something I would always generally would have said, would be thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
feelings,
Yes.
memories,
Right.
um, um, hopes, desires, fears, anything that is I classify as not something objectively tangible in my external world. That would be my normal
That's a really
initial
good,
answer.
yeah, that's a really good definition. So things like thoughts, feelings, desires, memories, that's a really good one. And so when you think of, for instance, your thoughts, where do you perceive these? Where do you, if you had to visualize, like, where do these reside and happen? Where would you say that happens?
My honest answer now would be the feeling is it actually comes from somewhere between my heart and my lower stomach.
Oh, that's so fascinating because most people would say it's in my head.
Right.
If I'm having thoughts, I experience them, most people experience them in their head. And then
Yeah.
when people experience feelings, if you talk about like feelings, people can very often say, oh, it's in my heart, like I have a heavy heart or I have a pit in my stomach, or, like they speak about their feelings as more like in their bodies, right?
Right. I guess
Yeah.
it's just over time because for me personally, I've found that it's hard for me to distinguish between a thought or a feeling now, and they kind of there's no thought without the feeling, there's no feeling without the thought. So I've lost that it's in my head
Distinction.
idea.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think for most people, though, they do separate out these experiences and that they do experience them, thoughts kind of being in the head and feelings kind of being more like felt in the body. Um, and also, when you think about your thoughts, are they things that you feel that other people are privy to? Like, your thoughts as you're sitting there just having a thought, um, is that something that affects other people around you? Just the thought.
Generally, the answer would generally be this is again, you're asking me, so I'm a little different than the
Yeah.
average person
Yeah.
because I know the average person would say no. But
Right.
I can tell that with people who know me really well, though,
Mm-hmm.
again, there's almost like this inner sense of like they notice that you're thinking about something and it's not normal thinking, and they ask like, "What are you thinking about?"
What are you thinking about? Exactly.
Yeah, they
Exactly.
don't know, of course. I don't think they are tuned in to know what it is, but they've picked up that something energetically is slightly different with certain thoughts. But I think that's as far as the average person can go, and they need to be you need to be very close to that person and spent a lot of time with them to somehow have that a little bit of the antenna. So in
Right.
general, the answer would be no. I would think the average person on the street is picking up nothing of whatever might be a thought.
Right. Right. So let's say you're in a room with someone and you don't know them really well. Then you would say your thoughts are not contagious.
I would say that my thoughts are not contagious.
How about your feelings?
Um, in general, I might say feelings might be more contagious simply because they have a stronger energy output, and so might almost like radiate like a type of heat from the body. So might have a,
Right.
which of course I know is wrong, wrong answer because thoughts are a wave as well, right? But generally, I would you would normally have been trained to consider that feelings have more of an external potential response than an inner thought, which is always believed to be something very sacred and private, and no
Private.
one knows what I
Right.
think. And
Right. And we know from experience that people pick up our feelings and that we pick up the feelings from other people, right? So whether or not like the idea of it is right or wrong, we absolutely know from years of living that that feelings are contagious or can be shared, right?
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I was just acknowledging. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there seems to be this difference in the way we perceive things as our thoughts as being sort of very much more internal, and our feelings as being something that do radiate. I think that's a very good image, is that they do kind of ripple and radiate out from us like waves, and have that potential of affecting other people, and vice versa, of course, that we can be impacted and influenced by other people's feelings. And so this is really interesting. So let's talk about now the container. So we've talked about like what's going on inside a little bit, right? Thoughts, feelings, memories, and such. So let's talk about, where does this happen? So you said inside the body, right? So most people perceive that as going on inside the body, that the body, like I guess the skin and maybe a few inches out from the skin, are kind of like the place where these happen and where they stop, right? And so what I'd like to do is back up a little bit and have you really, and have everyone who's listening really feel their container right now. If you think it's something that stops at your body, then really feel that, and feel if you can feel it going out from that at all. And you, Howdy, what do you talked about the field, right? Your field. So obviously you've gotten to a point where you don't perceive that as ending at your skin, for instance.
Correct. I would consider something that's more, that I could label as more mine, as being moving further out from the body.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, there's when I met a healer several years ago who'd worked with it, he had always claimed there was an optimal point for this. You might call it your personal energy field, and
Mm-hmm.
and you want to have it at this optimal point, and particularly if it goes out way too far, you're going to be picking up far too much. You're overly empathetic, and if it's too tight, then you're going to pick up nothing from your environment. So he was talking about this knowing this external space of is it too far or is it too close?
Right. And I would absolutely agree with that. And so how do you experience this physical space around you, this energetic space? Because we can talk about the energetic space, right? And everyone can say, okay, what is that? Maybe what do you think of that as? Like, is it kind of circular around you? Is it like a cone? Like, like how do you perceive this space around
Yeah,
you?
I guess the best metaphor would be somewhat circular or egg shaped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would, in my own personal, I view it with having sort of, there's also a color, or can be a color to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I notice, I tend to, I'm never paying attention to it, other than if I feel like, say I've been out somewhere at somebody's house for a while that I don't get along with, or I've been to a mall, I've been somewhere where I'm not comfortable, and I might notice I don't feel well or I feel drained. Then I might try to get a sense of, what am I picking up from the energy field? Normally, I'm kind of ignoring it.
Mm-hmm. And so with your energy field, like, is it empty? So if it's a field, let's say it's a sphere, that means there's a boundary to it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
Yeah. And so let's say we're really thinking about that boundary right now. Everyone can feel
Okay.
their boundary. Then what's inside of it? What's in there? Is it space, like empty space, and then thoughts and feelings pop up in there? Or like what is inside of there to you?
Good question. The initial response would be yes. It's like an empty space. I know that's not true, but that's the initial response that
Mm-hmm.
comes, that it's like the
Okay.
barrier, then it's empty, which I know is not, but that's the feeling. And
Right.
then there'd be the where the body starts.
The body. Right, right. Okay. So that's great. I think a lot of people, because there's no right or wrong answer. It's really how do you perceive this, right? What's your lived experience of this? And so let me just share with you how I experience other people. Okay. And this has been true forever. Um, I experience other people as having kind of a sphere, a personal space. I sometimes call it a biosphere because it is connected with your physical body, right? Um, and it emanates out from your physical body, but it's a part of your physical body, so it's not separate from it. And and imagine like this kind of egg-shaped sphere of energy around a person, and I experience their thoughts and their feelings as in that sphere. So not in their body, in the sphere. So if a person is having a thought, it's actually outside their body. It's a visible artifact outside their body, inside their sphere. Yes, yeah. Okay. So I experience other people having their thoughts in the field, in their field, external to their bodies, and also their feelings, right? And actually, a lot of the artifacts that, or the things, the processes that you feel are happening inside of your body or in your head or in this private space are actually, the way I perceive them, happening in your energetic field.
Okay. So now, do you pick this up as like images, as colors, as like pieces of data? How do you how does it how are you picking it up? What others are actually like the thoughts and the feelings?
So it's really hard for me to describe because I think normally people separate those out into separate perception methods, whereas it kind of all comes together. So I pick things up in all sorts of different ways. So I will see something, feel it, hear it, and then perceive a wave of it, if that makes sense, like a bodily feeling of it. That can happen all at the same time. But the most important thing is what I'm trying to convey is that it's not happening inside. It's happening in your field, and your field is a public place. Let me put it that way.
Mm.
Does that make sense? There is a place that is very private. Okay. So it's not like there isn't a private space for you, but the field is not a private space. And so if I can perceive these things, and of course I perceive them very clearly, whereas many other people don't. And yet that doesn't mean that they're not picking it up. And conversely, that you're not picking it up. So there are two conversations happening here. One is what you're projecting onto other people and what they're projecting out, how you're being influenced and affected, and what you're picking up from other people. So for instance, if I'm around someone and they're having, and this is really so common, a really brutal conversation internally, even as I'm talking to them, it's amazing people can coordinate this much. But so inside you hear this, in their field is this looping thought, and it's very critical of themselves, right? and we think of this as negative self-talk or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
imagine if I'm in a room with you and I can hear that. I actually see it and hear it. It's something I see in your sphere, outside your body, in your energy sphere, and I also hear it. And
Okay.
so imagine being in a room with someone, and we all, like think about how much of that is going on. There's this, some people are so brutal. It's like this brutal, like a horrible dictator inside saying all these horrible things to themselves purportedly, right? And yet this is happening in the public field where people can feel it and pick up on it, even if they aren't getting it as clearly as I am. So this is a whole concept that just is like, it's so different than what we imagine is going on inside of ourselves.
And it's leading me to two sort of totally different mm, lines of questioning. The first, of course, would be for yourself. So let's say we're in the room together, and I'm in a terrible I'm in a terrible mood. I'm creating this really junky thought while you're talking to me. So I think, oh, she doesn't know I'm having this crappy day. But
Mm-hmm.
not only are you picking it up, then this stuff must be getting, in a sense, projected to you, right? In some way, if it's waves or it's ripples, then it's being projected to well, say anyone in the room, but specifically probably wherever my attention is going, it would get more of the ripple of the wave, I would assume. So it's not just that a person is picking this up, or it's coming into their field. It's actually potentially getting stuck or influencing your energy sphere. Would that be correct?
It is correct. And let me back up and say a couple of things there. First of all, it's kind of like being in a room with a chain smoker. Okay. When we talk about
Mm.
like, how does this influence you? How does it spread? How, especially if you're very permeable, then that's kind of what it's like. And it's very toxic. And we all know that secondhand smoke is, is really bad, right?
Right.
And so it's really important. What I want to say here is that secondhand smoke is really bad. Well, the person who's smoking, I mean, let's say they have a filter, so at least they've got the filter, but you're just breathing it. And it's kind of the same with these things, because if you're used to having these crappy thoughts, let's say, that generate crappy emotions. And then you also have kind of like coping mechanisms internally, to kind of counteract these things, right? Otherwise, we would just all fall apart. But when you get it secondhand, it's not even yours. And so you don't understand. If you're not clued into it, you don't know where it came from. It's not even yours. It's not even part of what you're accustomed to, because we all have kind of like our own way of being inside, right? And so you don't necessarily automatically employ these mechanisms to neutralize it, or to get rid of it, or to minimize it, because it's not coming from you. It's not, you're not aware of it. And so the second thing that I would say, that when you're talking about like, okay, so you're generating, let's say you're in a bad mood, you're having these thoughts, you're having these maybe, as I was saying, maybe you're having a lot of self-criticism that's going on, this looping just monologue of, why you suck, the 50 ways that you absolutely stink. Is this coming from you? Just that in of itself, not even is it something you got from another person. Let's just start from that. Is it coming from you? Is it self-generated?
Yeah, now this is going to the second part of the question, which was, as soon as you label, as long as we keep thinking thought is somehow inside my body, then we naturally tend to think something I label me is generating it.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you say, well, actually, the thought's not in your body, let's say the thoughts are outside of your body, then the question becomes, well, where did they even originate? Are
Mm-hmm.
they really mine to start with? where, what is thought in general? It takes you back then to a totally new step. Then, well, what is actually thought, or what is
Yes.
actually a feeling? It takes a whole new realm of observation.
Right, right. And it's fascinating and very subtle when you're first getting into it. But once you get used to dealing with thoughts, feelings, energy, and your energy field in this manner, it gets really clear. And so let me go back to how I perceive people. So I've already said you've got this sphere, and inside the sphere, you've got a thought loop running, right? And it's going and going, and it's generating feelings because thoughts generally, like especially when they have a feeling tone to them, they will generate feelings in the body. They'll generate hormones and, like all these kind of things that have a physical effect. So here's this thought loop. It's running in your field. And what I see, because it's a thought loop, it's mechanized, it's a program, is that you've got an antenna coming up and it's picking up a channel. That antenna has been tuned to that channel. It's habitual. And that's where it's coming from. So the channel is some kind of self-criticism channel. So why would you tune into that? Of course. But you've tuned into this, and it's probably something that you've tuned into from the time you were very young. And maybe we can even say that your parents and your experience has trained you to tune into that channel. But it is literally like tuning into something with an antenna, So you're picking up on that. It's external to you. And then it comes down, that signal comes down through your particular system, right? And so it will take everything that's in there, memories and whatnot, and then it translates it out to this thought loop. And then it's just running in your field. And all the time you're thinking, that's me talking to myself. What a jerk I am. And it's not
So,
you.
yeah, this is a fascinating presentation and something that, and I've read a lot of Amara's material. She's not as much as I'd like, as you all know how busy I get. I've tried to dig into some of it, but this idea that whatever the thought pattern is, whatever the thought loop or the whatever we are running, it's like it has a central source. So if like someone says, I'm a loser, well, there's actually then, according to what you're saying, there's a centralized I'm a loser thought frequency that is generated from some central source.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm understanding this correctly, at some point in our lives, through probably difficulty, trauma, being upset about something, whatever, we tuned our radio dial into this frequency somehow and began to get trained to keep tuning our dial there. And it becomes like, it becomes this, it's not, again, it's so interesting because if we think it's us, but it's not, it's an external running, it's like a radio station that we're just constantly tuning to and thinking we're the one programming the radio station.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
And it's such a fundamentally different way of seeing what's going on. And I literally see it because I couldn't have made this up like as a, I don't know, as a theory or whatever, because I don't think I would have ever gone there because it's kind of weird. It's more like I see it. And as I'm seeing it, I'm thinking, what is this? Like what? And then I'm looking more carefully at it and investigating it. And I noticed it first in other people. And then, of course, I turned that inwards to say, how does this feel when it's happening to me? And then what can I do about it? And so, but the really important thing here is that there are your thoughts. There are genuine thoughts that we might have that originate authentically with ourselves, but those aren't the thoughts that are running in loops. And also they don't tend to be out in the public sphere necessarily. So our genuine, authentic thoughts are very often not very public. So in all these years, the things that I pick up from people in their field are not, they're all these programmed kind of things going on.
Would you be able to tell the difference when someone's having if someone's having what may call a genuine thought? Do you
Yeah,
feel
because I would
the
probably have
difference?
to do the thing that you said. I'd have to say, howdy, I see that you're thinking something. What are you thinking? Because I can feel kind of like a general thing, but I can't necessarily access those because the other is literally like a channel. So it's a public channel, right? And you're just tuned into it, and then it's like now it's now playing. Like let's say you literally had a radio inside your field, and you tuned it and it's playing. Well, of course, if you have a radio, if you walk around with a radio, I can hear it, right? It's
Right.
public. and and so it's kind of like that. Whereas your genuine thoughts are more of like they do have a tonal quality and they do have a vibrational quality. But unless you permit me to, unless you're in a sharing capacity with me, I'm not necessarily going to pick up on those in that kind of clarity because they're not a radio, like they're a very different, they're self-generated.
What's so interesting to me about this is Carlos Castaneda. So he talked about people having two minds, and he talked about one being this parasitic mind, this mind that is sort of taken over human thought and control, and then a real mind, a true mind that
A
we
true
all
mind,
have.
that's it. And who
Yeah,
knows their true mind? Because, in a lot of stuff that we absorb through spiritual and even religious literature and belief is that somehow the mind is bad and the mind is the enemy and we've got to control the mind and we've got to, and the thing is, in everything that I've seen so far is that the problem is not the mind. It's that we don't know what the mind is. We've had this thing that's on the surface. It's this superficial mechanism. And that's what we call the mind. And it's not. And so I love my mind, my true mind. And it serves me so beautifully. But it's not that. And so the thing is, that this superficial mechanical thing is so dramatic and it just takes up so much bandwidth, let's say, and space, and is always making noises and causing effects, right? Whereas the true mind, it's very quiet. It's very neutral. I'm always talking about neutrality. It's very neutral. It's not really dramatic. And so our attention is all taken up by this loud and crazy device, and we call it the mind. But this is not really the mind. It's the small mind, and then there's the mind with the capital M, which really, I would never want to oppose it. Like it's one of my cherished capacities.
yeah. If you ever get a chance to read some of Castaneda's stuff that deals with, I mean, he's saying almost exactly the same thing. The part that also links into where you talk about this radio and antenna, he had described it as this parasitic mind, the small mind you talk about, as there being only one. There's
Mm-hmm.
not separate parasite minds. There's only one parasitic mind that slightly seems to be that presents itself differently, but it's all the same. So they interlock with each other perfectly because it's the same thing that's just been a copy of each other, and that's a really similar metaphor to you having with the radio station and the you're just picking at people who have, if anyone thinks I'm a loser, well, they're just picking up the exact same signal, just slightly altered to fit their circumstances.
Yes, it's not even, the signal isn't altered, but once it's one signal, it comes into your biosphere and it filters through all your, you know what I mean? It then tailors because it goes through what you are, your systems, and then it comes out perfect for you because it's been altered in within your system. But when it's external, before it enters your system, it's just one thing.
So that's obviously leading us to the question I can hear my viewers asking, which is okay, how do I deal with my own or the thoughts I believe are my own in my energy field? Secondly, how would I deal with the thoughts of another person's energy field when they're influencing me? I can almost hear them now saying,
Right, right.
"What's
Because these
what's
are the
what's
two things. They're the same thing in a sense. Because first of all, as we've said now, okay, so in this idea of how things work, this is the way I see how things work, and that is that this people tuning into these channels, it doesn't affect just them, right? And if you are not aware of your energy field and you're interacting, and we do, it's not a bad thing. It's not like we're saying, well, you shouldn't interact with people or people who have, let's say, like low self-esteem. So they're running these things all the time, like, but very loudly, and maybe they've got more than one channel going at the same time, that you shouldn't interact with them, that sometimes you're going to get contaminated, right? So we don't want to see people that way. But at the same time, you have to be really aware. You have to develop a relationship and an understanding and a moment by moment functioning of your personal space. And that goes two ways, as you said. That is what we are allowing to occur in our personal space and what we are picking up. Because we do. I pick up stuff all the time and then I've got to clear it out. And that's someone who's been working with this all the time. And that's just like, as you said, washing your hands. It's not like you say, well, I wash my hands and that's good enough, right? You do it all the
mm,
time. You wash your hands because you know, for instance, well, I've been on the subway. Guess what? I'm going to wash my hands. Another thing you're not going to do is you're not going to touch your face with your hands, right? If you've been on the subway. So it's not
mm,
fear based. We're not afraid of germs. We're aware of germs and we're aware of how they interact with our bodies. We're aware of how to get rid of them. And we're also aware of our own bodies, like our immune system. So we have the ability to fight these things off.
right. So, but when it comes to because they a thought and not because we might as well start with other people's before we get to ours. We might as well because that's probably easier for the average person to visualize and contemplate. Is that they're unseen. It's not like you've been on the subway and you do actually have some stuff on your hand. Oh, I got some goo on there. I better wash my hands. There's like a signal. So it's
Mm-hmm.
also this. You can be in a room or somewhere with someone and you don't. There's nothing that should. There's nothing that should signal something has just changed in your energy field if you're not paying attention to it. So it's this. There has to be yes, then become an understanding of what this energy sphere is and beginning to either have generate, like you say, some sort of routine or begin to notice when something might have been picked up that we weren't expecting.
Right. And both of those things are important. So just like when we do physical hygiene, we have all of these routines. I honestly don't think about plaque in the morning before, I don't have this big thought about what's in my mouth and why I need to brush my teeth, right? I just do it. And so there are these routines that we can develop that are just make life easier. And that's good. But then there's more than just routine when it comes to these energetic situations because there's obviously like, oh, if I'm going to be going into a counseling situation, let's say, right? So if I'm going to or even like, let's say I know my friend's going through a divorce and they want to get together with me and they're having a hard time. I know that going into that, I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to be exposed to a lot of energetic stuff from them. And so I can go in aware and then completely centered in my own being and really paying attention um, to my boundary, for instance, because when we're talking about that space, we did say
Mhm.
what's inside, what's outside, and then there is that delineation between, and it is I think of it as another organ, like you think of as your liver, like the boundary, your boundary is another physical organ to me. And it can take care of a lot of these things as long as you become aware of it and you start working with it as a boundary, right? And then there are also things that you can do so that you can get centered and be able to then, even in those situations when you're going to be dealing with someone who's got a lot of stuff going on, who's going to be emitting a lot of stuff, that you can be in compassion with them without taking things into your space. But the most important thing is to even be aware that you have that space. And for me, I'm sitting here, I can see it, right? I'm physically always aware of it. And so maybe it's, if you're very visual that way, maybe it's a little bit easier, but anyone can learn how to do this. So we know when we go to things like that, let's say we're going to go to a funeral or something like that, we are aware and we can go into it with awareness. And we can constantly check in with ourselves. But that's in these big, like these very dramatic situations. But really, we're picking up these things from just casual interactions with people. And that's where having a really good awareness of and relationship with our personal space makes a big difference. Because if you're not aware of something, how are you going to be able, these subtle differences, how are you going to know if something has ingressed into your personal space? How are you going to know that if you can't really feel your personal space? And then if you don't know what your personal space is like when it's in equilibrium, then how are you going to know if you're off balance? If you're always off balance. So actually, I would start with myself, right? Because
Yeah, I was going to ask. So now I would say the next question someone's going to say is, how might I be able to start to notice my personal space? How can I begin to experience what that is compared to what it's not?
Right. So one of the things that I would say is, like, for me, I've always kind of known about it. So I'm assuming that you weren't like this as a kid and you did develop this awareness as an adult, right?
Right.
Okay. So how did you become, so for someone who's always been aware of it, it's difficult to imagine not being aware of it, for instance. so
Okay.
maybe you could describe, how did you become aware of this personal space?
I guess for me, personal space began maybe 25 years ago, when for some reason this idea of the human aura was something curious to me. And I'm wondering, do
Mm-hmm.
people really have these colors and these things around them that I hear about? And I said, how can I test that? What is an exercise, or what is a way I could try to see an aura on myself? And I over the course of just kind of luck, bumped into somebody who said, I can teach you how to do that. Did that using a mirror in my bathroom. And eventually, in about 3 or 4 days, I began noticing colors and movement. And actually, I would almost call them pulses of color. So I
Right.
realized from that experience that, okay, there is something beyond the body that is also personal, even I don't know what it is and I don't know how it operates. At least I got to the point where I can say it exists. So something exists. That's how it started for me.
Right. And so that would be a great way for people to start. Um, you could also start noticing your thoughts and feelings, right? So you can start, let's say you have a thought and you feel it, it's like inside your body somewhere. Can you take that thought and feel it as energy and move it into the space in front of you? So now you're looking at it, or however you want to visualize that or think about it or perceive it, right? So if you were to, like, I could even just use my hand and like I'm going to do psychic surgery, right?
Mm.
I imagine reaching in to wherever I think that's happening. And then I pull it out just temporarily, place it in front of me in my personal space. So that's one of the ways that we can start visualizing these things like thoughts and feelings being not just like in our bodies, right? We can visualize them being outside. And then once it's outside, then I would say start interacting with it. That's what it is. And does it have a color? Is it pulsating? Does it have a tone? Like everyone perceives things in a slightly different way, or maybe a very different way, you know? And if you're not used to seeing things that way, then that's a good way to just start practicing, just to inquire, well, what is this like? What qualities does it have? And it teaches you to look at it differently, first of all. But also, if you think about your sphere, anyone can imagine a bubble around them, right? And they can imagine that bubble as having a boundary, a membrane, let's say, like a bubble. A bubble has a membrane. And what's inside of it is you, and what's outside of it is not you. And then if you can even do that, then you can start to relax your idea of like your skin as being the end of you and breathe out into this bubble. And I'm not talking about your air breath, right? But we use that air breath for so many other purposes. And you can start breathing out. And automatically, do you feel that you have more space? First of all, because I can't imagine being confined into the skin of my body, having this immense thing that I experience myself as being somehow compacted. And so breathe out into this bubble. And then this bubble, the ends of this bubble, the membrane, it's made out of something, let's say right now we can imagine it as being very impermeable, right? But you can see through it, however you want to see that, glass or, you know. And we can see through it, but it contains us. And so if everyone is maybe practicing that right now, immediately, because right now I tried to do this thing, I had to like pull myself all the way into my body and then imagine what that feels like. And then now I'm going back. So right now, as I'm doing this, I'm going in and out, right? I'm contracting my personal space all the way in. And then I'm letting it pop back out to its healthy, normal, this is me. This is where I live and have my life. And immediately I feel space and a sense of spaciousness and a sense of, let's say, your thoughts and feelings now have more space to be in, first of all. And now I can see things, visualize things as not being compacted in my body, but they're out in front of me, they're around me. And then there's another thing inside of your personal space. And what is that? Well, it's you. What the heck is you? And that's a big adventure that you know, that's a big journey to go on. What is you? What should be filling your personal space, if not thoughts and feelings and memories and blah, 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 right? That's all in there, all this stuff. But what if it's not? What if those things are released through energetic hygiene, first of all, but then eventually you don't generate these things internally. And then eventually you don't pick these things up so much from your external environment. Then what's in there? As you said, is it empty space or is it filled with you? And if it's filled with you, what is that? And what does that feel like? Because it does have a feeling. And it's the most delicious, regenerating, nourishing, authentic feeling. And mine goes all the way to the edge of my boundary. That's it, from the inside out. It's just filled with me. What's that? What is that for
Hmm.
you, Howdy?
Well, it's a good question because it's even trying to know how many times have I felt that? How many times have I experienced my external, what you might call my energy bubble, me, and not
Yeah,
something that's not me living in that space.
right.
Um,
Squatters, right? It's like
Squatters
having
or
a beautiful mansion, but then you're only, inhabiting one broom closet, and then you've got squatters, in the rest of it. And, it doesn't have to be that bad, of course, but, to say this is my home all the way out to the edges, all the way out to the edges. And I don't have to have a radio playing telling me anything. Because another thing people will do is they'll change the channel through different practices to a nice channel. I can get on the gratitude channel. I can get on the life is a blessing channel, the I love everyone, the I'm so positive. I can change my channel to that. But guess what? It's still programming. It's still not uh, the neutrality and the amazing booming essence of my own self. It's still an external thing, and it's still just a radio playing now, blah 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 blah, right? But it's nicer. That's an improvement, sure. If you're going to play the I'm going to be a fascist channel, I'd say that playing the changing the channel to the gratitude channel is going to be better, and then you'll feel better. That's the thing. You will feel better, but it's still, so it is an improvement. If you're just going to do that, I'd say do it. But I just want people to know that there is something else, and that is the absence of radio silence. And then in that absence, because, a lot of times we have these traditions that really talk uh, about making the mind be quiet, right? And so that's fine, but that's not a goal. Like, that's not the end. And that's also not the mind. So being very specific and saying you're actually you're just not listening to the radio. You're turning the radio off. Because if you had the choice between switching the channel and turning the radio off, you would turn the radio off. But then what? Because the goal, like nirvana, isn't just the absence. It's not an absence. It's what happens after that. The discovery, the ability to hear your own core frequency, and then to be able to amplify that until it's in every cell, it comes all the way out. And so when people are around me, it's so funny. I have this weird impact on people, even if I just barely say anything. And people will walk up to me and they'll be like, oh, just in casual conversation with someone I'm never going to speak to again, they'll say, oh, uh, you're a vegan, right? Which I just laugh. I'm like, I'm not a vegan. Why would you? Or some people will say, oh, I can tell you do yoga. And I'm like, I don't do yoga. But what they're perceiving, it's funny, right? Because our minds make up these icons of what this must be like. All they're perceiving is just that I inhabit my personal space exclusively all the way out to the boundary. So when you interact with me, that's all you get. That's all you get. You don't get radios playing. You don't. And this is what people interpret that as, right? But that's all it is. And you don't have to do yoga to do it. You don't have to meditate to do it. You don't have to be a vegan to do it. And it is all of our birthright. Like, it's not a special Amara thing. It's all of our birthright to do this. We all have the capacity to do it. And how wonderful. I mean, how wonderful. I've never met a person whose core frequency, if you can get it, right, is anything other than I'm just blown away by the beauty of it, right? No matter what their personalities are like, because their personality is also running, it's very loud, it's like, yeah, 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 right? But these are two separate things. And so when you experience someone who just has that going, it's amazing, but also to be the person experiencing it, because this is my experience of life. This is my life, right? And it can be life for everyone. We don't have to listen to the radio, but we also need to learn how to, but we have to want to turn the radio off and know that it's a possibility, um, rather than just channel change, because that's what so much of self-improvement or spirituality goes for. It goes for the channel change.
This has been really important stuff, and it's one of the reasons I had trouble answering your question when you asked what does it feel like, because I instantly knew the answer to what is my real frequency, or what is it like when my real frequency is playing. I knew it's not just an answer like I feel good or I'm happy,
Right,
because I know, like you say, that's a trick too. That's still, like you say, it's a different channel. It feels better, but it's still a program. And about the one of the times it came through for me of when was this frequency there would either be a combination of something like right after my experience in the canyon, where there was just there thought, I there couldn't even have a thought.
right,
Even if I tried to have a thought, it just
right.
couldn't
Yeah, it
exist.
just didn't work, right? Yeah.
It just didn't function, and all there was this deepening sense of whatever was going on, and whatever was going on was fine, and it was very emotional and very sense of curiosity with everything happening. It's a totally different space. I could also say sometimes it would happen in the midst of very key sporting events that I played, when you became so immersed in what was happening for one reason or another that, again, this sort of the radio was off. The radio wasn't
Hmm.
there. And
Right,
I don't want to say it's like being in the now or mindfulness. It's nothing like that. It's just a sense where the external kind of the normal external noise kind of just, you can't get, even if you try to get it, you can't. As opposed to if you're playing a game with yourself, you can pick up the channel again if you want.
right.
And then that leads to the
So let
question,
me tell
like you
you
said, you have to
how I
want to
see
turn the radio off.
people connecting with. Right, right. Well, you have to know it's possible. You have to want to turn the radio off instead of turning to a different station, because frankly, the I'm blissed out station feels better in some ways than just just neutrality, right? Because it's kind of like eating sugar, or it's kind of like taking a little I feel good drug, and so it has these effects, and we can really enjoy that. And so if I say, well, why don't you experience just the neutrality of your authentic self, I'd have a hard time selling that. Howdy, honestly. I've got a bottle of neutrality for you. Um,
Right.
and I can't hype it up, whereas I could really hype up some of these really great, I feel great channels. And so even wanting to, is one thing, and then knowing you can. And so how do you do that? I will tell you how I visualize it. Okay. And everyone is going to have to approach this in a way that makes sense to them. But what I actually see in people is an antenna that goes up, like literally, like these things that come up from their head and like around their heads, but specifically, let's say from the top of your head, and they go up, and then they get tuned to these channels, and you can retract them. So first, I guess you would have to imagine or try to feel them being up, you know? So just try to
Mm.
feel. Can you even get a sense of that? Of like having an antenna? You can visualize it as like, maybe it's biological. Like maybe you feel it as like an insect, or like they have living biological. And right, right. So I was talking about first visualizing it. So we were saying, you can visualize it as biological, as belonging to like a living thing, like an insect, as part of your biological body. Or some people will feel more comfortable thinking about it as a piece of technology. So some other kind of like an antenna or a satellite system or something like that, right? So whatever it is, however you want to see it, it comes out from your head, and just feel it, just try to see it and feel it. It's fine if you don't get something exact, right? So you're just feeling and exploring that. And then I want
So
you
sorry, as
to,
I'm
yeah, go
exploring
ahead.
that, because I'm
Yeah.
exploring it right now, and
Mm-hmm.
as I'm looking into it, the top of my head feels extremely hot.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Just as and beginning that process, and now my head is extremely warm.
Right. Right. So that's interesting. And just from looking, just this quick little bit of looking, right? And paying attention, you can feel it. You can feel it, and everyone will feel it in different ways. So it's not this airy fairy thing that's like, imagine you have a star at the top. You can feel it. So you just have to train yourself to be perceptive in that way. And then as you work with it, you will feel it in more subtle ways. So once you feel it up there, feel the ends of it. Like take the time to really feel it, hooking into something, feel it picking up. And then you can just take it and retract it down. Just like, I mean, obviously, an insect doesn't really do that, but like slugs do, right? Snails do. An antenna that is extending can be retracted down. So I want you to retract down into the very center of your head. That's where its base is, and it just can live there, and it's very silent, and it can just come down. And then when you do that, feel whatever you feel, but notice, right? Any changes in the quality of the way your body feels or the way your energy field feels.
It's in my case,
And I feel a huge difference.
I would say there's a feeling of less
Yeah.
pressure around that part of my body. So it's like before there may be like a squeezing feeling. That squeezing feeling isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
In your body or in your head?
In my
Yeah.
head.
Where do you feel it exactly? In your body or in your head? The squeezing
In this
feeling that's not there.
that would have been right around the head, and particularly began to be more noticed as you asked me to pull the antenna up. It all of a sudden became like a pushing pulse against, and maybe that was why I was feeling warm. Um, and then once the retraction happened, there's been that pressure is just kind of gone. And
Mm-hmm.
there would also be, I could also say that what I guess what you classify as roughly around the third eye, that part of the center of the forehead feels a bit more clear, if that's a good way of describing it. And it's harder to think.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Or I
Right.
guess you would call
So
it not really thought. You would
yeah.
call it hard for me to
Well, it's
pick up
harder
these signals. Yeah,
to have those thoughts. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think, and it's just the quality of my authentic thought, it's entirely different. And it also just doesn't produce my own authentic thought. Rarely, it doesn't happen often because it's not necessary all the time. It happens when it's necessary. And it never produces those kind of, like frantic thoughts or self-deprecating thoughts, or, it doesn't produce those things. It produces thoughts that are useful to me. And therefore I don't tune them out, because it's my actual thought process. And I don't have to fight against it or second guess it, or tune it out or whatever, because generally everything is very solid and quiet. And then these things will occur, my genuine thoughts. And so they're useful. I don't have useless thoughts because it's a very efficient system. Our authentic, real system is very efficient, and it's made for our benefit. Whereas this whole other system, first of all, what does it do? It wastes our bandwidth. It literally causes friction in our system, heat friction, like a kind of, when you're running a computer, like programs that are very demanding and your computer starts to overheat. That's kind of what this thing does. So it robs us of our bandwidth, and it produces a kind of heat friction that's very detrimental to our bodies. It sickens us.
And it was so important because something you had said a little bit earlier when you were talking about the happy program was how traditions, the standard traditions and the self-help community and all the things that make a lot of money, organizations make money, are generally working with the antenna. They're working with the program. They're working to fight it, attack it, change it, alter it. They're not, none of them, one, really understand what thought or mind is. So because they don't really know what it is and again can describe it the way you've just described it, they're always going to be presenting something that is actually fighting it and is not in some way, like you just said, retracting it and ending its operation.
Right. Yes. And then allowing you to discover, because that's the first
Yeah,
part,
what's real?
right?
What's actually
Yes,
real? Yeah.
exactly. And in which case, when you discover what's real, you'll learn, first of all, that it's for your benefit. Like this thing doesn't operate against you. Think about how much like your life and your bandwidth is wasted fighting yourself, right? And then we take these different traditions to learn how to fight ourselves more effectively or whatever. It's just, oh God, it's so exhausting. So once you get out of that whole superficial, it's really just on the surface, this mechanism. It's almost like it's overlaid. If you imagine like your beautiful, authentic self, and then you have this kind of weird, junky machine that is overlaying it. And that's what it is. So once you just stop feeding and working with this junky machine, what you find underneath it is not problematic, which is wonderful, isn't it? Like if you go deep down, what you find is not just a well of pain or grief or difficulty or just more stuff that you've got to fight with. It's actually a blessing. It's actually stuff that's like, oh my God, this is nourishing. This is reliable. This is efficient. But it's also it's not glamorous. I have to say, it's not glamorous. I can't really, one of the things I always say is like, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm always okay. And that's just not a sexy thing. But it is the best thing I've ever found, because that's a basis for everything else. So work, I would tell people the things, just to wrap up, is to start just exploring your personal space. And if you don't have a feeling of it, imagine first just the bubble, because everyone can imagine that. And that feeling of like what's inside the bubble, the boundary of the bubble, and what's outside the bubble. Okay, so just practice with that. And then definitely try this retracting thing. And what I feel is great, it's almost like we all just want to retract it, obviously. But I would say the best way to master something is to do the opposite on purpose. So I would say retract it and then put it back up. And then retract. You know what I mean? So you're doing it intentionally on both sides of that. So you get to learn the mechanism both ways. And then really notice how you feel when you change anything, right? So when you visualize this bubble around you, how does that change how you feel? And every time you do it, until you get really familiar with it, you'll notice a little more subtle things. And then pretty soon it may become less subtle, and very apparent. And it's the same thing when you retract and put up your antenna. Notice every little thing. How does this change? Because what you want to do is you want to put a big stamp in your mind of what the authentic thing feels like, because we're not familiar with it. So once you become so familiar with it, if something changes my state even a little bit, I notice it so fast, Howdy. I don't have to wait, I'm like, oh, dealing with that, right? Because my baseline is that state. And so if you're not familiar with it, then how do you know you're off balance? How do you know you're being influenced? So the main thing is every time you establish that feeling of neutrality, of being like completely what it is you end up being alone in your space. It's just you. So what does just you feel like? And every time you get a feeling of that, even a little bit, stop and notice it and say this, right? You're training yourself to move towards that, this. And then you become familiar with it over time. And this is a lifelong practice. This is not, it's a beautiful practice, and you discover so much with it, and you gain benefits even from doing it a little bit. But it's not a one and done kind of thing. And so, but it's not hard either, right? Notice, practice, notice, practice, notice. And throughout the day, just random times, just check and say two things. Where's my personal space? Feel it. Boom, right? Here's my bubble. Because you weren't feeling it. You were distracted. You were, boom, here's my bubble. There it is. Throughout the day. And then another thing is, where's my antenna? What's happening with my antenna? Throughout the day, just check, every hour, every like 3 times, however you want to do it. Notice, where's my antenna? And so when eventually you start to get used to being in the state of having your antenna retracted as the norm, right? Then you will notice instantly if it starts to go up. And then, so this is not difficult. It's really just about becoming familiar with something that you may not have noticed in the past, and then remaining, familiar with it, getting to know it. These are, like I said, this is like another organ of my body, and I couldn't live without it. So it's very familiar to me now. And it's not like nobody taught me this. So what I want to tell people is that this is so natural that, if you could even start doing this as a child, just kind of trying to feel your way around life, then certainly, the people listening who have had all these years and have all this knowledge and all this awareness can certainly do this on their own. So it's not tedious. It's very light. It's very easy. And you will discover things. You won't need me or anyone else to lay out the map. If you know the basics, if you understand the fundamentals and you pay attention, you will discover how your system works. It will reveal itself to you. It's not actually occult, as in hidden. It's not really that esoteric. It's just that we haven't been paying attention to that. So that's it.
And then I guess, because we're almost at the end here and I want to wrap this up, but because you gave, things to do sort of often a day. And one was, where's my bubble? 2 is retract and actually put the antenna back up. So you get used to what that is. And I guess the third thing, I don't want to get into it, but would be, I guess, once or twice a day, also just kind of do some sort of energy wash or energy cleanse of your personal space to pick up anything that you might have come with during the day.
Absolutely. Yes. Because once you start being able to visualize this as a distinct space, because if I tell you to wash your energy or whatever, if you can't visualize what that is, how are you supposed to do that? But people can devise numerous ways to clean out their personal space. So if you imagine that your personal space is a bubble and someone has been smoking around you, we'll just use that, and it's gotten into your personal space, you can imagine all these different ways to have that either sucked out by some system, or you can imagine like a waterfall of light, or, there's so many different ways. I'm sure people are familiar with them. and imagine cleaning out that space. And these are like things that come from outside to suck out these things. But I've had a lot of people who have taken my Peerless course, and I teach different techniques. And some people love those, right? Because we're also different. And other people devise these things that go the other way. So it goes like a starburst from the inside out, clearing out your personal space, right? So there are numerous ways to do it. But yes, I would definitely say the two great times to do it would be at night, obviously, because we have the debris of the day. And like, do you honestly just come home and not wash yourself at all, just plop into bed, into your very precious dream state, by the way, which we can talk about some other time.
Mm.
I need to make sure that I am like clean and just perfect going into my dream state. So at night before you go to bed, I would definitely, it's not a big ritual either. When you get used to it, it's just like, it's pretty much instantaneous when you get used to whatever practice works for you. And then also during the day, if you've had a difficult encounter with someone, I would definitely, right afterwards, I would be like, okay, here's my bubble. Here's the tension or the weird memes, the ideas that they've left with me, the feelings that I picked up from them. And I would clear that out. So I would start with that, and then you can get more advanced from there. But that's really easy. Everyone can do that before they go to bed. And if you do that after you've had a difficult encounter with someone, you'll feel great. So, you'll feel much better, and that will give you the positive feedback you need to continue doing that practice.
I wanted to say thank you for joining again and sharing what I really think is a lot of very valuable wisdom for all of us. One of the things I really like about Amara is that she can, if she wanted to, be presenting a very happily ever after presentation to make herself a lot of money and gain a big organization. But I've always appreciated that she's been very, very honest in what she presents. And so I'm so grateful that you could come and share some of that today. Would you like to tell people where they can reach you and get a hold of you if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Thank you. I can be found at amarastrand.com, and I also have a YouTube channel of the same name. And it's been an absolute delight, as always, to talk to you and to everyone else, Howdy.
Thank you so much. I'll have the links in the description below. Please, after hearing this, leave your comments and share your own experiences. If you've been doing something like this yourself, or if this is totally new and you're going to try it out, how that goes, we would be curious to know how this works in your own lives. So thanks again for joining us and sharing this with us.
Howdy.
Yeah,
Okay. Is that it?
we're still there. So I guess I'll just stop it and I will clean it up then.
Okay. Thank you.